Hello, everyone. Today is November 3rd, 2021. This is the Kubernetes Data Protection Working Group meeting. Today, we have two topics, actually mainly one topic from Ronak to talk about the volume mode conversion. All right, I think, Ronak, let me make you a presenter. Ronak, can you check? Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, let me give it a try. Hey, so can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So thanks, Xing. Hi, everybody. So this is, my name is Ronak, and I'm actually gonna continue a conversation that we had a little while ago about a snapshot security issue that we sort of not ran into per se, but sort of identified early on. So the current issue that exists, I'll just run through the basic problem just so that everyone can sort of get on the same page, and then where we're at with the proposal and how it's changed in the last week. So the issue that was identified is basically that it's currently possible to restore a PVC from a snapshot, but actually sort of modify the volume mode of the new volume that you're creating. So the steps are pretty simple, right? You create a PVC with the volume mode block, and then write some malformed data to it, and then a user takes a snapshot of this volume, right? And then when you go ahead and try to restore that snapshot as a PVC, you can actually change the volume mode to file system. So currently there is no sort of security bug or any kernel issues that we know of, but there's a potential in the future for a malicious user to use this sort of gap and sort of attempt to crash kubelet or a node or whatever. So the reason we don't want to block this completely is because this is actually a valid use case for some backup vendors. This is actually, I think it's a more efficient way that some backup vendors use to restore volumes. So there is a valid use case, but at the same time, there's a potential for a malicious user to sort of take advantage of it. So we spoke a little while ago about introducing something called as what we call as volume security standards, which was basically really similar to the pod security standards that was introduced recently into Kubernetes, right? Where this pod security standards actually replace the old pod security policy or PSPs, and then they sort of define like some security standards, what it means to violate it, and what ways you can violate it, and stuff like that. So this was the original sort of proposal that we went with, and just started involving other SIGs and stuff, just to see what they think about it. So pod security standards was actually introduced by SIG Auth, and we ran this by them last week. And one of the key sort of takeaways from that meeting was that it seems like we're doing a lot of work for one use case at this point of time, right? It's a totally, it probably makes sense to just sort of make it less generic and more specific to the issue at hand. And one of the reasons they said that makes sense is because right now there's only one sort of parameter that we would have introduced in the volume security standards, as opposed to pod security standards, which has a whole bunch, right? You can define a bunch of configuration which as part of the pod security standard. So that was the sort of feedback that we got from them, and they actually gave us some good ideas as well about how we can like use annotations or some sort of certificate authorization sort of stuff. So I'm just going to go through in this meeting. I just want to go through like this annotation sort of mechanism that we can potentially use to solve this issue. So before I get started, any questions about the background and how we got to where we are now? Cool. So originally the goal of this document was actually to develop something or design something that's generic and can be extended to other storage-related security aspects. But now that's moved into a non-goal section. So the only goal of this document is to design a solution that's going to solve our problem at hand. Right. So basically, what we're going to talk about is three main points. The first thing would be that we want to introduce something called the source volume mode into the spec of the volume snapshot content API. Currently, that doesn't exist. And this source volume mode is going to be basically a copy of the persistent, the PVC's volume mode when it's created. And we'll go into details of how that's going to go about and stuff. Secondly, we're thinking of introducing a new annotation on the volume snapshot class, which basically would be a comma separated list, which sort of specifies the users that are allowed to convert the volume mode of a snapshot or of PVC. Right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
You might be planning to cover this later, but that source volume mode that would be copied on, do you know what we're going to do about the upgrade issue for existing ones?
Right. So at this, yeah, I mean, not upgrade in particular. So let me just answer that right now. So basically, we're just going to say that if it's empty, it's an optional field, right? So if it's empty, we're just going to sort of.
Oh, okay. So it can be either block or file system or blank, which means we don't know. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And then we just go back with the existing behavior. So yeah, and totally the third sort of main thing that we're reintroducing here would be an admission controller, which basically intercepts PVC creation calls. So let me just sort of go through that in a little more detail in the next sort of couple of pages. So firstly, the change to the volume snapshot content API. Again, it's going to be an optional field. And if it's left empty, it'll be treated as unknown. Otherwise, it's either file system or block. Secondly, we're going to introduce this annotation on the volume snapshot class. So that's going to be something like a comma separated list of users that are allowed to convert the volume mode of the volume. So basically this the volume snapshot content, sorry, the volume snapshot class object is a cluster scoped object, right? So the assumption here is that only the admin or someone with access to a cluster scope object and therefore with privileges already would be able to sort of add this annotation. It wouldn't be a user who's in charge of a particular namespace or anything like that. So that's the assumption that I've gone with over here. I mean, if there are any like thoughts about that, I'm definitely open to listening to that.
Why is it tied to users?
Because so right now, so originally we went with something along the lines of namespaces, but it sort of on thinking about it a little more, it turns out that in the same namespace, a backup vendor can attempt to restore a volume from a snapshot as well as a regular user in the same namespace. So so sort of the granularity at the namespace level doesn't work.
Well, I'm just thinking that the thing that has to enforce this may or may not be aware of the actual user. I'll let you get to enforcement and then maybe re-ask the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So basically this volume annotation will be copied from the volume snapshot content to the from the volume snapshot class to the volume snapshot content when it's being created. And in the case of dynamic provisioning, that will be done by the snapshot controller. And the reason I've sort of gone with that sort of mechanism instead of doing it directly on the volume snapshot content is basically that it's sort of cumbersome, I guess, to actually go to each snapshot content object and add this annotation manually, right? So the hope is that you add it to the snapshot class, and then every snapshot created from that snapshot class gets that annotation as well. Now moving on. So these are the sort of changes to like I guess, an API and an annotation. And then we're also going to make changes to the snapshot controller, right? Because in the case of dynamic provisioning, the snapshot controller actually has, or dynamic snapshotting, I guess, if that's the right word. The snapshot controller has like a bigger role to play, right? So in the regular case, what happens is the snapshot is created by the user with the snapshot class optionally specified, right? And then the volume snapshot content is created by the snapshot controller. And it's the snapshot controller's sort of responsibility to update the spec of the volume snapshot content object. So with this sort of design, we'll be introducing 2 new changes to the snapshot controller. The first one would be to populate the source volume mode of the snapshot content, right? It will fetch the persistent volume mode of the PV. And if you actually go into these links, the snapshot controller already gets the PV object. We just don't use the persistent volume mode. So it's not that big of a change. And we'll use that volume mode and populate the snapshot contents new source volume mode field, right? And the second sort of change would be that it would look for this annotation in the snapshot class, which again is sort of already part of the code. Like the snapshot controller already has access and gets the or does a get on the snapshot class. So it'll look for this annotation, and if it exists, it copies that into the snapshot content as well. So and of course for static provisioning, obviously the admin has a great role to play. So populating these fields is sort of the admin's responsibility. So this, I guess, this design mainly deals with the dynamic case, right? So again, if it's left nil, then the unknown mode will be assumed, and that's done to preserve existing behavior. Any questions?
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
I have some questions about sort of the when this list will be updated. So I guess my concern here is that the way this works is, first of all, the list is different per snapshot class. And then also when you create a snapshot, the list is copied sort of from the snapshot class to the volume snapshot contents. And
right,
as far as I can tell, it would likely be sort of static from then on. So I think that
for that content, yes.
Yeah, for that content.
Yeah. And then I guess so it would be static for that content, but then you could, as an admin, go and update the snapshot content again, and that overrides what you sort of originally had copied or originally was copied by the snapshot controller.
But I think the question is, well, why does it need to be per snapshot? Why couldn't you just have a single policy object that applies to all of the snapshots? So that, like, in case you wanted to like add a new user after you already had 8,000 snapshots who was allowed to perform this, you wouldn't have to go modify 8,000 objects. You could just modify a single object and say, yeah, this guy can do it too.
Right. That's a good point.
So actually, I was wondering, do we actually really need to do this at the user level? Because the backup software will be the one who is, adding this annotation, and then which has the admin privilege, right? Is that the non-namespace object? If that's the case, then I mean, why do we still need to check the user? Just wondering, would that be enough? Just use RBAC to say, because the backup vendors can can modify the volume snapshot contents, so you can do this.
You mean via like some sort of RBAC or something?
I just not sure. Like, do we actually need to check the user? Because if some user does not have permission to modify the content anyway, then if someone has the permission to change the content, then I mean, there's no way you can actually protect anything, because
but Xing, he hasn't got to the admission controller part and how it actually works. I think I can imagine how it's going to work, and you need the user to make it work.
Right. So the admission controller would be pretty straightforward, right? basically you validate if the PVC is being restored from a snapshot. And then if it is, then you go ahead and compare the two volume modes. And if they don't match, then you get the list of, if they don't match, you get the list of users in this list that we've populated on the snapshot content, right? And you validate whether that user or the user requesting this current volume is present on that list or not, right? And if they're not present, then you reject the PVC creation.
Why can't this just be done with RBAC?
I think that was Jing's question just a moment ago.
Yeah, I think I agree with her. Like, why do we need to populate this with that?
RBAC is only about what verbs the API server will let a user use on a resource. That's as detailed as it gets.
True, but you could also do something like make a new verb for this particular thing and grant access to users to, say, change or something.
I didn't know
particular,
that, I didn't know adding new verbs was an option.
I think it's possible to do that, and I wonder if that would be a simpler, more native solution.
You can definitely add checks on sub resources at least.
But those are not that easy though. You have to add that to the API itself. It's not like you can just add one easily.
So Ronak, you mentioned users. Does this apply to service accounts as well?
I think ideally it should, right? But I actually haven't thought about that in detail in terms of like whether it's just like service accounts or also just like, I guess, users. But ideally it should.
You need a way to say that an ordinary user can't do this, but some special backup application can do this.
Right.
Yeah, but ordinary user cannot
account.
cannot be admin. I mean, because if you're admin, then
but an ordinary user can create a PVC that points at a snapshot and gives it a different volume mode.
Right.
And today, like we just run with that. We say that's great. This admission controller is going to start looking at that request and saying no, you can't do it. But then we need an escape hatch that says, well, some guys can do it if they're given special permission.
Yeah. So basically, I think that's well summarized, right? It's how do you define what the special permission is and where.
It feels like for mutability, I mean, for the ability to add new users to the list of users that can do this after all you have a bunch of snapshots, it really makes sense to have some indirection, another layer of indirection of some policy object that the snapshots can point to, is there's like a list of users that have the permission, and then you can just directly add users to that list. And you don't need to be copying lists of users all over the place.
So you're suggesting like another CRD just to define.
The question I would have around
probably be a cluster
users.
scoped CR for lists of users that are allowed to do this.
I mean, I think I agree with the cluster scope thing. I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I imagine if you're a large enterprise that has multiple clusters, you probably don't really want to maintain this in your clusters at all. What you probably want to do is have some sort of central list of all of your users who are on like the admin team or the backup team or whatever, and then sync it to all of your clusters automatically. I think probably maintaining the CRD is the best we can do, just because we don't take any dependencies outside of the cluster, but it's actually not ideal. And yet, to Jing's point, I think if we can do this by installing like a special cluster role and using Kubernetes normal RBAC permissions, that would be significantly simpler. And I haven't really heard a reason we can't do that.
Yes, so maybe
I'm not clear how that would work through RBAC, because this is when you're creating a PVC, right?
PVC is just a resource, and it would hit the Kube API server at that point. You would do the admission check, or am I misunderstanding?
I think the admission plugin could query RBAC. Like there is some special object it could create. I don't remember how it's called, unfortunately. like, can this user do this verb on this object? And API server returns true or false. But I don't remember how the object is called anymore.
But I guess I don't understand what like a new verb would be, because this is just setting a volume mode on the PVC object, which any user can do.
No. Like, we would have admission that would get create of PVC, and that admission plugin, or like webhook, it would create a different object asking API server, can this user do this verb with this object, with this source snapshot, for example. And that I
But
think
we're
that's
not,
possible.
but we're not actually, at this time where the admission is running, we're not actually doing anything on the snapshot objects. The snapshot
Not
objects
yet.
already existed, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you're doing a put on a PVC. Is what you're doing.
Correct,
post.
which is what like any user can do today, right?
Yeah.
It's any user is allowed to set the volume mode on a PVC today.
Yeah.
So maybe as a concrete example, we could look at OpenShift's security context constraint objects, right? So, I mean, you know, that restricts the settings for, you know, things like the user that the user ID that a pod can run as. And so that's similar to restricting the field in your, you know, that you're setting in your PVC. And in that case, normal RBAC can be used to grant a user or a service account those privileges by giving them the use verb against a particular SCC that has that permission. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
I think that's exactly what I was going with, John. Thank you for.
I'm
giving the
still
concrete.
not quite picturing it, because it's like this is a conditional thing. It's like
It would be,
only
yeah.
if you set the volume mode and you specify the data source to be a snapshot, and the snapshot has a different volume mode, then it's disallowed. Like it's not, it's like
That's
a
correct.
conditional scenario.
But I like the fact that it rides on the RBAC system, where you can basically just have a role with some funny verb called use that points to an object. And we'd have to define that object, but then the act of giving new people permission to do this special thing is merely just binding them to a role that has the use on the special object, and then the admission controller just goes and consults that and when the appropriate situation arises, and if the checks pass, it says yes, and if it doesn't, it says no.
And the real good thing about this, real quick, is also like just having a list of users is sometimes not sufficient, because you can have a user granted like a scope down credential token. And so like if it's just the user checking usernames, then that isn't sufficient, because you actually need to check the scope at which the token is being used, because it could just be like only gets or something. So that's another good reason to continue to use the subject access review when comparing like can a user do something in a Kubernetes cluster.
So so I think I would need to look up like this whole security context constraint and stuff, because I think my mindset was sort of similar to what Michelle was saying, which is it's just a field that you potentially may not want updated versus something you definitely don't want updated, right? Only if like certain conditions match, you don't want it to go through. So that's something I would actually have to sort of go back and look at and see how you can like add a new verb and stuff like that. But definitely something to look at. So
I think the only thing being, the only question is what is the user interface for deciding who has this power or not? I think everything else about it makes perfect sense. The question is just how does the admin say these are the people that can do it? And the RBAC system does seem to have advantages over sticking
Right.
annotations on a snapshot class, and then having to copy those around and consult it.
Yeah, I think the mutability point was also pretty something I hadn't thought about earlier. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Cool. So maybe Xing, let me take a look at that. I think two or three really good points have come out of this. So let me take a look at that and then update the page and obviously keep getting some feedback and stuff and running it through everyone over here.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think if we're starting this, right, like as an alpha feature, I think start with the annotation, I think should be fine. And then later on we can see if we should actually, use another policy API object or something.
But would that change the user experience too much in a, I guess, a short space of time?
Yeah, but if it's alpha, I mean, if it's alpha, normally.
Right. Makes sense.
Okay, well, let's see. We'll see. Okay, we'll see if other people are fine with that too. So
it will all come down to whether this particular mission controller is installed or not, right? Like if you want the old behavior, you just don't install the submission controller and you get the old behavior.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, what are the other changes that we are making in the snapshot controller? Because everything is only in the mission controller, so.
No, so snapshot controller, the main changes would be updating the volume mode, or sort of copying the volume mode, and as well as copying the annotation from the snapshot class to the snapshot content.
Okay.
Which we might not need. The second part we might not need.
Right. Yeah. I guess the first part is definitely necessary. Irrespective of how we're going to enforce the rules.
Okay, so so is everyone okay if we just proceed with this and propose a cap, or you guys think we should talk about this more before doing that?
I really think that we should explore the RBAC before creating a cap. At least add that as an alternative on the cap would be, I think.
I would like to sort of hear exactly how that might work. I can imagine in my head, but it would be nice to see it written down by someone that knows what they're talking about.
Okay, so maybe Ronald, you can maybe write down more details, like how exactly this would work.
Yeah. Let me do that. Let me actually go back and take a look at all of that and maybe write it down as two alternatives, and then we can decide on one.
Okay.
Cool.
And I'd never heard of the use verb before, so I learned something new in this meeting. That was useful information.
Use
I'm sorry,
what a verb again?
You can add like you can add arbitrary verbs, I believe, to RBAC.
We have not. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's something that maybe Rona can take a look of that. I didn't know that. I thought every time, I thought those are pretty restricted, but if it's actually customizable, then maybe it'll be much easier.
Is there a standards body that controls who's allowed to use what verb? Because if it truly is just, if they're not namespaced, then anyone can just pick any verb.
Yeah.
I can see there being conflicts.
Do you have any link to show this?
I have a list of existing verbs, but the list looks like very limited. I'm not sure how.
He says there is a way you can add your own customized verb. I didn't know that.
I don't know.
Yeah, and if verbs aren't, if there's no namespacing, somebody needs to be controlling access to that list, right?
Yeah. Like we already have the use verb.
Determine this is the one. Yeah, require. That's those are. Yeah, but those are the well-known one, right? Is there another way to create your own?
Send it in the chat.
I
Right,
think
but this is
it's pretty involved to create a new verb sub-resource in. Oh, wait, are we talking sub-resource or verb?
someone was, is
Verb.
that Sean? Someone was saying that you can actually do your own without even apply for this one, without going through API machinery. That am I very
Like,
surprised? That's what Matt.
CRDs might make it easier. It's definitely very
Oh,
involved.
if it's CRD, then that's different. Yeah, I thought it's just like you can just do something. Yes, but if it's CRD, of course, then you can do that.
Oh, but this would be a verb on the PVC object, which is entry.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
Is
pretty involved.
Is that even possible? I don't think. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. It's possible. I just reviewed someone added a new verb to the pod object.
But then you have to go apply for it, right? It's not like you can do it yourself without asking approval, right? This is like officially adding something, right?
But that's what we probably should do, right? We should get the approval because this is the better way of doing it.
Michelle, if you have an example of that, maybe you can share.
Yeah, you can look up. I just reviewed the pod ephemeral containers review. You can look at that feature.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Michelle, you said it was easy to add a sub-resource to a CRD.
I think it is.
You have to apply for it. I mean, it's not like this is not like we decide it has to go through API reviewer. It's not like I thought someone mentioned that you can actually just do this, just add that in your YAML file, then that's it. You don't even have to get it.
We don't want more sub resources. That doesn't solve anything. We want a new verb or to overload the use verb potentially.
I'm not clear on verb. I think in CRDs, the sub-resource is just like there's like a sub-resources array. But I'm not clear on if you don't want a sub-resource, but you want another verb. I'm not sure if you can do that with CRDs. But anyway, we're talking about PVCs here, which are not CRDs.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so it looks like we need to look into this more and see if we can just define our own, add our own verb. And
in the setup of the problem, it talks about how this workflow is required for data protection vendors. Another alternative could be to actually make that a more explicit workflow and not have to kind of, this is a bit of a hack, right, to change the volume mode potentially. Maybe we can also come up with another workflow that lets you do that and then lock down this workflow here.
But this workflow is used, right? It's used by back vendors already. You're saying don't need this? I'm not getting.
I think we do. I would say we do need this, but the mechanism we use is almost accidental, right? That's changing the volume mode.
Not accidental, I think. Back vendor, they did this on purpose, right? They just didn't know there was any potential problem, potential kernel issue. That one we didn't realize that, right? So what I'm not. So what is your suggestion? How to
was support for this in the volume controller on purpose? I mean, it seems like it was, it happened as kind of somewhat of an oversight. Then back vendors picked up on it and started using it, or was this kind of a supported workflow?
I don't think this is a accident. It's just back vendors. We don't record the original volume mode in the snapshot, right? So provisioner is no way for provisioner to check this. And then this is a type of workflow that used by many backup vendors. Maybe you don't use it, but I know other backup vendors use this to retrieve change blocks. So
yeah, so we do use this, yeah. But
you do this, okay? So I'm not getting what you're saying.
Well, the other half of it is that no one realized there was a security issue until maybe 6 9 months ago. security issue came up, and then that's when we had a conflict. 'Cause if there was never a security issue, no one would be complaining about this. We would just leave the doors open and let people go
Right.
nuts.
Yeah, a security issue, and also that's also like potential one, right? So, but it's still good to fix it.
I guess what I'm asking is, the problem is that the Kubla is trying to mount something that might not be a valid file system, right?
Right, you're saying there a way to like make sure that is valid before we mount it? Probably
Yeah.
we don't have a way, I guess, right? Yeah, I don't think we can. Yeah, is it possible to actually to check?
No.
No.
I don't
That's
think it's
the
possible.
thing. It's not possible. So when it's mounted, it's too late. You have to mount it to determine, and then it's too late.
Yeah, makes sense. Never mind.
Well, even if you had a checker, it would be vulnerable to the exact same set of security vulnerabilities that the kernel has.
Sure.
You mount it at some other. How about you? Well, then you have to have like a spare node or something, just to do something there. That's just too much, right? You have a testing node only for this purpose, and you make sure everything is just mounted there and then test it. But that's just too much overhead. That's maybe the only way. Then you basically you bring down that node, you're fine. Probably nobody want to do that. It's too much cost just to have a node for that purpose. Okay, so so then yeah, maybe we're not yet. We need to do some more investigation and just look at other alternatives, and we can maybe come back.
Yes, makes sense.
Stream maps to something concrete. I don't know, what do you mean, Tom? Stream maps. What do you mean?
Well, so there's
the
RBAC
RBAC. You're talking about the
checks.
RBAC. Oh, I see.
Yeah, there's the actual verb maps to an HTTP verb or something, right? Or a watch, for example. But the string itself does have meaning, has semantic meaning.
It does, but it's not. I believe when you create the RBAC, it's not actually.
So if we, I wonder if we just create
enforced.
something that is not recognizable, would that be like, will the API server just reject that? I wonder. Like Michelle, do you know if we just put some name, not like creatively all of those well-known ones?
I could be wrong, but that was my understanding, Tom.
Okay.
The request going to the API server itself does map to some verb though, right? On the server side.
Maybe if, yeah, maybe
I didn't
the
think
server
it
will
did.
reject that if it's not even recognizable. I'm not familiar with that part, but it's possible.
The API server wouldn't be doing the rejection here. The API server would see a create and it would say, sure, that's fine. And then the admission controller would get another chance to review it, and it would go look for this other verb.
What about if it's, I'm just saying, if we add something that is not create, I just add my own verb, I code my own verb, then what's going to happen? The API server do anything with that?
I don't know anything about that. I'm still trying to
Okay.
find evidence of verbs other than the 6 standard ones that Kubernetes allows.
Yeah, I've never tried that. I don't know what will happen. I actually suspect maybe it will get rejected by some admissions controller.
We could try it pretty easily, actually, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, because I think normally they have some tests, some validation tests. We make those changes, maybe get rejected somewhere. Okay. Do we have anything else about this topic? All right then. Yeah, then we'll just we'll do some investigation and come back, and we can talk about this again.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me stop the share.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So then we have another topic from Shine. Oh, we should make you can present.
Sure. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, did I? Okay, sorry. I need to make you a presenter. I thought I did that, but maybe not. Let's see. Not seeing your name is, you logged in as yourself, right?
Yes, my name is
That's it.
Shyam
Oh, okay.
Dhananathan. Yep.
How come it's not? Where is that? Yeah, I guess you, but I was looking for it on the participants. Oh, okay, I see it. All
Thank you.
right. All right, try it now.
All right. Oh. Okay, can you folks see my screen?
Yes.
All right.
Did you add this link to the agenda doc? Maybe so that
Yes,
okay, thank you.
I did. Yeah. All right. So this is about disaster recovery and some thoughts around what we want with respect to disaster recovery related to storage. It's not an introduction to disaster recovery as such. It's more about disaster recovery in Cube. Just some basic terminology, which most of you probably aware of. The recovery point and recovery time objectives are what typically measured for disaster recovery. And in this case, we're talking about a disaster that takes out an entire Cube cluster, and the workload needs to shift to another Cube cluster and reattach to its storage that's been synchronously or asynchronously replicated and continue to function from that point on. So, so the landscape hence moves this way. These are borrowed from a KubeCon presentation. It talks about Ceph, but it's immaterial what storage is used as long as storage supports data replication. So the landscape does deal with multiple storage clusters, East and West in this example. It does deal with multiple storage systems, possibly one per region or zone, as the case may be, and that the storage systems are capable of synchronous or asynchronous replication. Sync is usually when the latencies are lower and hence supported in those modes. And the diagram that I put in here actually talks about the async case. More on the landscape is that what we're looking at is that the application is actually active on one of these clusters. It's considered standby on the alternate cluster, and different applications can be active on either of these clusters. It's not necessary that all applications have to be active on one of these clusters and standby on the other. And the use case we're not looking at is an application being active on both clusters, which kind of falls down to storage being used synchronously across these clusters. That's we're not looking at shared storage systems in this case. So what we really want to do here is so broadening out the scope a little bit to other generic storage systems is usually storage systems have concepts of pairing volumes across storage clusters or storage nodes, and using the data plane in the storage systems to do the asynchronous replication of data, either based on snapshots or some form of a continuous data log that's sent across to the other end. And the intention here is to be able to use that replicated copy in case of disasters and move the workload to the alternate cluster, the surviving cluster, and continue from there on, right? So this presents us with quite a few challenges, actually. One of the first being that what we want to do is we want to manage the storage replication lifecycle along with the application's lifecycle, so that the replicated endpoints are created when an application is deployed and torn down when the application is no longer in use or not required. And also, typically storage systems have, because this is asynchronous replication, have a concept of what is primary end for the replication, what's the target or the secondary end for the storage endpoint. So we'd like to manage those relationships. And And yes, because this is asynchronously replicated, there would be a point in time where there is a split brain, or data has to be healed or resynced back to one of the endpoints post a disaster event. So this is something that we're looking at, based on which we're talking here, so that we can have CSI extensions that can add-ons, whatever we want to call it, that can actually help us manage this for individual PVCs for a given application. The next challenge that we're really looking at is that because these are applications that are deployed across across Kubernetes clusters, the usual dynamic provisioning of PVCs cannot take over, because that will just give it a new storage endpoint, and we really need to reattach the PVC request or to the replicated storage endpoint on the remote cluster. So applications need a way to present this desire. That's first, and then once they need some form of ability to reattach to the remote replicated endpoint on the other cluster. That's another challenge, which for example, we could do with any data source, things like that have been added recently. But it is something that needs to be factored in if you want to pull off disaster recovery across Kubernetes clusters. The replication policy management, not so much a challenge, it's kind of an orthogonal need, because once you have some form of replication management across clusters, you would need some form of policy control to schedule replication, to manage identities of both kube clusters and the storage clusters, and ensure they are in a mirroring or a replication relationship, and so on. Other challenges are how do you really get across the application resources across the kube clusters? Not necessarily a storage challenge, but it is something that needs to be considered. And there are, again, a couple of ways to do this. One is you can have them deployed and passive on one end, which comes with its own set of challenges, actually. And they can remain undeployed and can be deployed on demand on the target cluster from some declarative source, hand wavy GitOps, something like that. But this is something that, again, outside of storage, but still is required for the solution overall in this disaster recovery landscape. Some other challenges are custom operators and how they deal with resources. That again causes some level of problems, because even if we look at PVC level reattach semantics to a replicated endpoint, custom operators may just decide to create PVCs arbitrarily named or without the format of data sources that we probably want to use in these scenarios. They sometimes even create very arbitrary PVCs without giving the user the ability to define names and semantics for the PVC, other than basic information. So those are other set of challenges that we need to look at here. And the last one that I put in this slide is, it's not only enough if the application moves across kube clusters. Traffic routing to these applications also have to be shifted across these clusters once the application moves. Again, not a storage concern, but something, an orchestration concern from a bigger standpoint. So I just put down this introduction and some of these challenges here. A couple of weeks later in the meeting, we'll probably expand on this and talk more about use cases. But I wanted to understand if there are others who are interested in something in terms of disaster recovery and storage replication across kube clusters, and how to reuse these volume endpoints, and what do people think about this?
Hey, Shyam. My name's Tom. I work at Dell. Do you have an implementation of this, or is this just something that you're wanting?
So we do have an implementation, which we call volume replication, CRD and CRs, but that could be very Ceph specific.
Okay, we just introduced the replication that works with 2 of our storage arrays, and we'll come with more. And the code's all open source, and we'd be happy to work with you towards standardizing it. We've worked on some of the challenges that you described, like when we set up the replication, we actually create PVs remotely, or have a facility for creating PVs in the target cluster that's annotated with like the namespace and the names that were from the original cluster and the data. And we have a repctl command that allows you to essentially create duplicate PVCs in the target cluster. Additionally, it supports the basic failover, actions like failover, failback, swap.
Is this
Those
part of
kind of
the
things.
Karabi?
Yeah, it
organization?
is. Mhm.
Right. So I had been following that. I'm not going to say I have been following that because I did read about the intention for that project to follow to enable replication in this
I'm sorry,
scheme.
what's the name of the project?
Ravi was a code name. It's now called Container Storage Modules within Dell.
Oh, okay. I think
But
I remember.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we would be interested in working towards a standard with you and possibly contributing components if that would help.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also do support Metro replication on one of our arrays. So it's active replication from 2 arrays.
Right.
And-
We are, sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, this is Ben Swartzlander. I won't go into any detail, but I'll just throw out there that NetApp has done the same thing in our Trident driver. It's open source, but the implementation of it is based on proprietary software. But we've gone down the same path, and we have a working implementation that does a lot of this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So
this is Eric
same
at
here.
Infinidat. We agree, and we would also like to participate in this from a replication implementation standpoint. We do all the typical varieties, including 3-site, which is an interesting topic as well.
Thanks, Eric. Did you talk about a specific company name there or a storage system there? So I missed that.
That was Infinidat with our InfiniBox.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so one good thing is, looks like there are multiple people doing this. So there's probably a good need to standardize on the interface so that CSI vendors can do what they need and the orchestration can do what it needs and users know what they need to do. So we'll definitely, yeah, we do want to. That's why I'm not throwing out what we did right now here. I do have this last slide, which has a bunch of, we had a talk in KubeCon, which talks about what we did or what we are doing right now to solve this particular problem. But we would want to look at standardization efforts so that it makes it easier for users to use as well. So sorry,
I think we only have like 1 minute left. So so let's see how, a lot of people interested in this. That's good. So how do we proceed further? I wonder, maybe it still makes sense for you to present what you have done next meeting, and then we can see the comments, and we can see like what others have done differently. Or do you have other, you want to do it differently? That's up to you.
It really depends. Yeah, we can definitely talk about what we did for Ceph and run through the spec, and there are other components in play like the open cluster management, multi-cluster managers. We can talk about that, or we can, because there are quite a few people who are interested. I'm going to assume we can also talk about what we want to do, how we want to do this, and come back. People who showed interest, how would you see this moving forward?
I think probably there are a lot of people interested in this, so I think it's good that we actually maybe we can talk about it again in the next meeting, unless if you guys can't wait and want to meet before that, then that's in any case, I think we can maybe we can coordinate offline. There is a data protection working group Slack channel, emails work too. Then we can decide what we want to do next.
Sure, that works.
Okay. All right. Thank you for thank you for sharing this. I think that's it for today. Thanks everyone. Bye.